Yeah, thanks so much. This work is joint with my colleagues Nora Dillon and Nicole Marlika, and also with Danielle Lee, who is at MIT. So, as I'm sure folks in this room don't need to be told, generative AI is now being used more and more to perform a wide range of kind of knowledge work tasks, presentations, legal writing, information retrieval, all of which are best represented by someone staring thoughtfully at a computer screen. But this has the potential to be a real boon for productivity. We have a quote here from the head of investment banking at JP Morgan about what used to take 10 hours potentially taking 10 seconds. And there's growing studies, maybe not showing 60-fold productivity, but showing large 50%, 2x kind of time savings in a variety of pretty specific tasks. But what we want to ask is thinking about it more from the worker side. So rather than thinking about productivity on specific tasks, thinking about workflows and jobs and the distribution of those things across the employees in a company. Here's a rather alarmist headline about the potential effect, at least on some jobs, which I'm sure is not made any better by the ad that the algorithm chose to serve next to this headline. And there's certainly potential for a lot of upside. I think the optimistic approach is that this will make jobs more interesting by automating away some of the routine or mundane aspects of the task. But whose jobs are becoming more interesting? And so within the realm of knowledge workers, we can think about people doing different types of tasks, but we can also think about people at different stages in their career. Right? So we might think maybe novice workers, they're the ones where the grunt work usually falls on them. They're going to see large benefits being able to push some of that onto the AI. Or potentially the managers who used to rely on their novice workers for the grunt work are going to be able to kind of shift that to the AI and act a little more seamlessly or independently with less reliance on members of their team. And so what this study is trying to get at, kind of after looking at the kind of what direct individual effects, thinking about some of those distributions. And so we have a field experiment looking at Microsoft Office Copilot, which for those of you who don't know, is Microsoft's product integrating AI into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and then also Outlook and Teams. So in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, it's helping people create documents, edit documents, summarize documents that have been sent to them. In Teams, it's the main thing I think is recording and summarizing meetings, giving people action items after meetings, and also information retrieval, searching across your documents, your emails, your chats. And in Outlook, it both does summarization of emails received and also suggested replies. The empirical design here is that we have over 60 firms who agreed to randomize the allocation of some of their licenses. So this program started last fall, late summer, fall, when this product was first made available to enterprise customers. And each firm sent the research team a list of 100 users at that firm who they would like to give Copilot access to. And firms varied in how they made that list. Some did kind of, hey, who's interested? Some did, oh, we think this group of people really need it. So there's a pretty wide variety in which workers within each of the firms were eligible for the program. And then we randomly selected half of the users at each of the firms to get a license. And the data we have is telemetry or metadata from Office. So no content of emails, documents, any of that. But all the interactions, creating the document, timestamps for edits, timestamps for opening of files, things like that. And then stuff from communication patterns in Outlooks and Teams, messages sent, messages read, emails sent, emails read. And we can look at the kind of anonymized IDs of the recipients if they're within the same customer to think about the collaboration network within each of the firms. And again, having data not only on the participants in the studies, but on other workers at those firms to fully graph that network. For a subset of firms, as part of sending us this list of potential participants, they gave us the roles or titles of those 100 participants. So that allows us to think about the managerial role. Just to give you a sense, in no way claiming these firms are kind of representative or evenly distributed across the economy, but it is a pretty broad range of firms. Banking and financial services, professional services are highly represented, but we also have stuff in retail and construction as well. Now, it's for the most part not going to be the construction workers themselves who are being given these licenses. It's going to be the headquarters office workers for the most part. I did talk to one company where we were discussing how low their uptake has been. And they're like, yeah, these guys are only at a computer like once a week because they're mostly out. And I was like, why did you choose them? Anyway, mostly it's the knowledge workers. That was definitely the target population. And we're focusing on one tool, but this is a pretty broad field, right, in terms of building on ChatGPT, other large language models, developing tools aimed at kind of different aspects of knowledge work, and also increasingly trying to get beyond kind of the individual working on their own and thinking about coordination among teams. Otter AI is the one I'm most familiar with that does kind of a meeting summarization similar to Microsoft Copilot, but I think there are others that are thinking about these facilitating collaboration and communication. And that's where we really want to think about how these tools can affect the way managers oversee the tasks that are performed by the individuals on their team, how they coordinate the work, how they allocate the different tasks to people with different skills. And so with that mindset, we'll think a little bit about productivity, where we think there's kind of a growing literature on it, but then we're going to be more focused on task allocation and how kind of the Copilot doing the automation of some of the mundane or routine subtasks affects kind of which workers are best suited to which task and how tasks get allocated within a team. And then also communication, and whether maybe the summaries make it easier to keep track of larger teams, or they make it easier to kind of pick up where somebody left off and thinking about kind of collaboration and work transfer in that way. So kind of just the first stage, if you want to think about this as an IV, but we're just doing reduced form, we have pretty clean treatment. There's a little bit of contamination of a couple people in the control group who absolutely had to have a license. But in general, we see that people do start using these licenses when they get them, but uptake is incomplete. This is weekly average users we see is about 40%. And so while most people do eventually try the product at some point, if I look at ever used, that's in the 90% range. But on a weekly basis, only about 40% of the people in the treatment group are actually using these tools. And so I think that is going to be a bit of a caveat behind the numbers, or you can see it as a caveat to the study in that firms are still kind of figuring out how to do training, how to do change management, but you can also see it as these numbers are diluted in some sense by the 60% of people who aren't actually even using the tool and are presumably thereby unaffected by having access to it. So the rest of what I'm going to show you is split out by managers and IC. So I just wanted to take 1 minute to kind of go through how we do that. As I mentioned, we only have job title information for about a dozen companies. We hand code those job titles into either being a manager or an individual contributor. And then we train a model that allows us to predict, based on all of the telemetry data we have, who's a manager and who's an IC. But what I'm going to show you today, we found the most predictive, though there are differences in their document interaction behavior, that the most predictive model was actually one that focused on their behavior in email and Teams. So I'm going to focus on that model. We do a lasso regularized logistic regression. And so we train it with a training and test sample. So out of sample within those where we know ground truth, we get about 73% precision for ICs and 67% managers. And then we obviously don't know what our precision is for the other 50 companies where we don't have the ground truth information. So here's a bunch of different things people do with documents. You can think about someone originating or creating a document, editing a document, what we call editing with help, because the file sharing system kind of tracks when you have two people editing the same document, either at the same time or kind of over a usually 4-week window. And then we have draft review, which we think of as someone who's reading a document that has been edited by somebody else in that time window. And you can see managers in general are interacting with Word, Excel, and PowerPoint a lot more. All the bars are higher. But also note that they are originating a smaller share of the documents that they are working on. So more likely to be working on other people's documents. So these are coefficients from event study regressions. So we have individual and week fixed effects. We aggregate the event study coefficients to the monthly level just for power. Broken out by IC on the left and managers on the right. And so this is the files edited in Word and PowerPoint. I should say that for the most part, Excel goes in the same direction. I think that we focused on these because we have less of a mental model for what document collaboration in Excel looks like. We think it has a somewhat different life cycle in terms of the, hey, I work on this, we edit it, and then we send it to someone to read, and it's shared more broadly. So we thought that Word and PowerPoint had a little bit more similarity in kind of the typical document life cycle. So that's why we focus on those two here. And you can see that for ICs, there's a little bit over a 10%. The pre-period mean here is 0.8 documents. There's a little bit over a 10% increase in the number of files edited. And we're working on kind of converting this into IV, since I mentioned that kind of low overall uptake. And as you would expect, that does drive up these coefficients quite a bit. And then managers were really not seeing much effect on the files edited. We can also look at co-edited files. So here, thinking about not just I worked on a file, but I worked on a file with somebody else. And again, we're seeing an increase for individual contributors, and if anything, a bit of a decrease for managers. Looking at the emails variables, here's actually where we see the largest changes, most dramatic, and I think that's partially that uptake has been a little bit higher for the Copilot in Outlook. We think that's part of it, and then maybe also just that these metrics are a little bit more closely tied to what the Copilot is actually doing, as opposed to document creation, where maybe you're using it, relying on it a lot, but it's not actually changing the extensive margin of your work. So large decreases in both emails read, and then this is the log of the time spent reading emails. So depending on how much you care about the right tail, this is saying about 6 or 7% and about 10% decreases for the managers, and here it's about 5% based on the log. And sorry, this one is time spent. This is number of distinct emails. We're seeing pretty large differences there. And I've just got 1 minute left, so to wrap up, we're really interested in how access to the technology is distributing tasks within a team between managers and ICs. The preliminary evidence suggests that it allows ICs to do more, perhaps starting to look a little bit more like their managerial coparts. And we see managers doing a little bit less, perhaps able to delegate or rely more on ICs for some of the document work, and certainly saving time on email. We have other variables that we've been working on the engineering for to think about more about this time spent piece, and how that maybe connects to time per document or something like that. Teams and collaboration network of each individual, and thinking about spillovers of if people on your team get Copilot and you don't, trying to look at how that might affect folks on all these dimensions. So thank you. Yeah, question?
So in one of the figures, you mentioned that the Copilot adoption rate kind of dropped as time passed. So is there a specific Copilot product that workers adopted better compared to the others?
I think all of them show this initial spike, either due to getting emails about it or trainings or novelty, so that they all show a bit of that initial spike. Overall, usage is somewhat higher in the Outlook and Teams relative to the Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Yeah?
First, interesting result. Thanks for presenting. I'm curious, do you measure what are they doing in edits, for example? Because I'm thinking there might be an endogeneity here in terms of Copilot being used. Itself is pushing suggestions, and that is making the contributors edit more, and also could be suggestions or minor edits. Do you actually measure?
So I think it's an important question. Two things I'll say. One, the advantage of the field experiment is the kind of external validity. The disadvantage is that we can't see any of that kind of internal to the document content. But what I will say is we're not looking at number of edits. We're looking at number of files edited. So if you went in and writing text counts as editing. This is just changing the file. So if you went in and wrote a whole thing versus you went in and Copilot created something and then you made a bunch of edits, that would both show up as a file edited. So we don't think that, since we're not counting number of edits, it's not purely driven by that, but we can't measure quality, we can't look at exactly what edit actions people are taking within these files. Yeah.
When you said people are using less email, what are they doing?
So Outlook Summarize will basically be like when you open up your email, it's like, hey, what's important or what have I missed? And it just, so it may be that they're hearing about the content from those emails, but they're just not having to read them individually.
So they're seeing it somewhere else.
Yeah. That's the hypothesis. We can't say for sure, but yeah. So that's the hypothesis.
It's possible that because of the sharing of the information through the documents, that they need to exchange less emails because they are communicating through the documents?
That is possible. We can't rule it out. I guess the scale, like, people have a lot more email than they do have documents, so I'd be surprised if that were a large portion of it, but it's definitely possible.
So how you measure reading email? Say clicking?
Yeah, having it open in the reading.
Yourself.
Yeah, in the reading pane.
Okay.
All right, I think I got the time signal, so thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Emmanuelle Walkowiak from RMIT in Melbourne, Australia. We're leading an initiative called Flow GenAI for the future of labor, organization, and work with generative AI, and I'm glad to be here today. So the argument I will propose today and demonstrate, hopefully, is this idea of inseparability between GenAI use and AI risk exposure at work, and showing that it is one major driver of the transformation of jobs and the future of work. And for that, I'll just rely on some of my papers. One published in Economics Later for the theoretical arguments, and some empirical investigation in Australia now. The model in Economics Later, it's just a very simple production function, but it considers the properties of GenAI. So what are these properties? So there is human-created and AI-generated outputs cannot be distinguished. So basically, AI is like a worker. It's an AI agent worker in the production function. And what matters in this model is a matching of workers and GenAI to tasks. Okay, like in a Bakerian perspective. So it's looking at this matching process. And the work organization is an organization when you have interdependencies between tasks. So all tasks are interdependent. And that is what will diffuse the error risk. And this is a model of Tremor of the Oring paper. And the last property is that I introduce an interaction term between GenAI and workers following models of social interaction. So this is the model of Glaser and Schiffman. And so these interaction factors allow us to consider different situations where we ban the use of GenAI, so there is no interaction, or when we favor the interaction between GenAI and workers at the workplace. And so I will not present the model, but the key results. So basically, what matters in the matching process in this situation, this is the propensity to detect errors. Okay, and this propensity to detect errors, it is endogenous in the model because it depends firstly on your local expertise, your ability to detect errors for a specific task. First element, it will depend on a learning effect between GenAI and workers. And so through that, it will depend on the proportion of tasks that are allocated to workers or allocated to GenAI, and it will depend on the intensity of the interaction, the interaction term. So it depends on three things. And this propensity to detect errors, this is what is driving the matching of workers or GenAI to tasks. Okay? And so it's different from what we had I think since the beginning of what I heard today, here what matters is not the productivity gains coming from an acceleration of work or a larger set of tasks that you can complete. It's coming from your performance to detect error in the production process. So it's more kind of quality of the output that matters in that situation. And that's important because risks in an O-ring function generate multiplicative effects. Okay, which means that a small risk in the task, you say, oh, but that's a small risk, but it is spreading in the production system, and so just the production can collapse. So that's the O-ring model. And so what we find through this model, so the result is that in a situation when workers and GenAI interact, you should have an assortative matching on the abilities. All right. And you expect more productivity in this kind of firms than in firms that ban GenAI use because there is a learning effect that will be positive. So you may have a competition for talent between firms. I'm coming back on the learning effect, which impacts the propensity to detect errors. And so how does it work? Actually, workers and GenAI are two interdependent sides in the learning. So there's a co-production of learning, okay? But in this co-production, you have productivity gains and diffusion of risks. It's going together, okay? It cannot be separated. This is the inseparability argument that I'm proposing. And so looking at how it works like a network externality on double-sided market. Okay, so this is the same dynamic, but here it's on the double-sided internal labor market, this dynamic. So it is within an organization, within a firm. So this is the theoretical argument. And so looking at how do we measure risk at work, AI risks at work. I did this exercise on the Australian labour market with Trent McDonald and Jason Potts at RMIT. And so basically what we did is that we use the methodology of Elundu and Daniel Rock to measure GenAI exposure and extended it to measure AI risk exposure. Okay, if you are not familiar with this methodology, it's a methodology that decomposes jobs into tasks. So you look at the exposure through synthetic data generation, the exposure of tasks to GenAI, and you aggregate at the job level, and after you can aggregate for the labor market to have some figures. But we did that for exposure to AI risks too. And so we use the Australian skill classification and the Australian labour force survey of June 2023, which has few advantages. We have the time spent of each task, for example, so to have a good picture of how it aggregates within jobs. And the risks that we are looking are cybersecurity, breach of professional standards, bias, misinformation, accountability, and intellectual property problems. I focused in another paper on cultural and creative industries, which are interesting to look more in depth because culture is both an input and an output of GenAI, using a new classification that was released in between by the Australian government, and which is good because they give a very good definition of jobs, especially in cultural and creative industries. And so we have all this data with all this risk. And so the question now is, how do you measure risk? You know, you get so many points of risk. How do you measure it? So we run a principal component analysis to see which are the dimensions that are relevant. So the first component, the first axis, is basically the intensity of exposure. So it's how much you accumulate the risk in the job, okay, and the magnitude of these risks too. Okay, that's a kind of combination of that. The second one is the timing of the transformation. So if it's a direct exposure to risk or indirect one. So direct exposure being like given the image, video, and language capabilities of GenAI. Indirect is that if the technology improve or if you have additional investment. And the third one is the nature of the risk. And here you have an opposition between what I would define as business risks, which are related, for example, to IP rights or cyber security, so they impact directly the business model potentially, and risks that are more societal in nature, like misinformation or bias. And so as all these components are independent, they are orthogonal, they are not correlated, we can identify zones, clusters, that we define as zones of job transformation, and I'm rapidly showing you these results. So we have 5 clusters, A, B, C, D, E, and so you have on the chart the GenAI exposure, risk, a representation of the risk with a direct exposure to AI risk, so you can see how they combine in the cluster, and indirect risk exposure, all right? And so the first zone, A, this is the one of intense direct transformation because of the use of GenAI, but also because the exposure to all this AI risk. So we discuss it as a kind of Stack Overflow in digital work. You have all this change coming, all this AI risk coming, and workers need to upskill, to adapt very, very fast. The second zone, you see it here, so cluster A. And so the jobs in it, for example, if I can tell you, yeah, you have editorial assistants, blogger, music copyists. We are in cultural industries. The second job zones, they are anticipated intense transformation. So once again, accumulation of AI risk, but it's indirect. So it's not right now, but it's coming. So it's like, and this is the orange zone here. It's like a pending update in digital work. Okay, we know that workers will need to upskill in those jobs. So we have, for example, web developers, digital marketing. So they are kind of all IT roles in culture, like all they require tech skills. Like they are really these kind of jobs. So not traditional right now, but it's coming fast. The third zone, so you have less exposure in cluster C, which is in gray here. But the characteristic here is the nature of the risks. They are mostly business risks. Okay, so perhaps less intense, but you know what does it mean? I mean, it's risk. Okay, and so especially for IP, because we are in a cultural industry, so. In those jobs, actually, there is a kind of need for risk management or organizational management firewall, okay, in terms of risk management. So here we have video producers, artistic directors, photojournalists, and so on. So more managerial positions that we have in this cluster. The cluster D, which is this one, okay? So this is not a direct exposure, this is to come, and when the exposure will increase, it's more problems of bias that can emerge, more societal risk. And finally, we have a zone which is very stable, which is a stable job zone, so less exposure, but also when you have exposure, less AI risk. We didn't have one single job, even not exposed to GenAI, which didn't show any risk. So there's no zero risk job with AI. So to conclude, what I wanted to show is this inseparability between generative AI and risk exposure. This is a driver of change and upskilling that is required now for workers. And the key point of using synthetic data and so on for that is that we need to assess risk now ex ante, because ex post it's too late. Okay, thank you for your attention.
I'm curious. curious, what are the jobs that are low risk or stable jobs that you have listed in?
So they are mostly jobs requiring physical performance. So you have a dancer, you have a makeup artist, those I remember. You also have teaching music teacher, okay? They are like teaching for kids, like private tuition teaching, because there's a high level of social interaction to play music. So usually they require either high level of social interaction, either physical performance mostly.
Just thinking on accountability, research is showing accountability because as Ethan has shown that usually when the AI interferes, diagnosis, lawyers, it's better than the human. But when the experts meddle, then the performance goes down. But
yeah, so actually there are a little bit two variables in what we do. To be honest, my accountability is not my preferred variable because as soon as you implement a technology, there is an accountability problem. Like, if there is a problem, who is accountable if it's not performed by a human, and the human will be accountable anyway. So it's a kind of variable that is highly correlated with adoption anyway. But so this is in this sense is that if there is a problem, there is an accountability problem. But in what Ethan was telling, and I think what you are referring to professional standards. So this is when you have a code of conduct. So professional standards, it's a variable that say, so basically in the program I entered a different code of conduct adopted in Australia. And if I use GenAI, and can it lead to a breach to the professional conduct? So this is a lawyer code of conduct or a health practitioner code of conduct, if we have that in mind. And this is lower generally, but still very, very high. So I think it's more comparable to that. And accountability is highly correlated with GenAI.